The next thing that we have here, and this is also maybe a bigger topic we can talk about too, is just the relationship between white universities and colleges and historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs. And Dr. Garrett has experience as having attended one and would also, will also bring some enlightenment to this topic. So Dr. Garrett, it's you, all over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Swanson, and thank you, NCCO, for having me here today with some amazing panelists. And it is important for us to be able to have these discussions, to be able to share our stories, share our lived experiences, because there's so many things that people just don't know about because you don't know what you don't know, and that's totally fine. When we think about historically Black colleges and universities, at first it's just about saying, well, what is an HBCU? Because there's some people who don't know because they were not born and raised in, let's say, Montgomery, Alabama, or in Greensboro, North Carolina. So HBCUs, according to, I believe it's the Higher Education Act of 1965, they had to be a school that was formed before 1964 or 63 to serve students of African descent. And there are currently 106, 107, I believe. Most of them are in the South, because if you just are thinking about the Civil War, thinking about slavery, and that's where the greater populations of Black people were. So as you stated, I'm a proud graduate of an HBCU, went to Hampton University and had an amazing 9 semesters there. Enjoyed all the times that I got to go back for the annual church music conference that has happened there for many years. And I did also teach at a historically Black college in Pennsylvania, Cheyney University. I was there for 5 years. So I've got experience kind of on both sides. And one of the things that many people just don't know is just about the immense culture that we have that has grown there. It is there that I really got one of my most exciting research topics. Some people have known about some of the things that I've talked about. No need to go into all of that, but it was the repertoire choices that we had there, the composers that we chose to champion. And I didn't even realize that we were championing them because we just did it all the time. And it is in those cultures, some of my friends and I have joked about how February, Black History Month, is pretty much National HBCU Choir Month. And I vividly remember some Februaries where we would have at least 10 performances to do in 1 month. And because of that, and because of the touring experiences that we had, which are direct descendants of the tours that the Fifth Jubilee Singers and the Hampton Singers did, because of that, HBCU choirs are known for traveling all the time. So St. Olaf, not the only one that does many concerts all over the place. They're great. Concordia, I mean, there are many others who do it, but HBCUs do it a lot. And in those experiences in our music programs, we do learn about music from the traditional canon, but we are also taught a little bit more about the composers that I have identified similarly to us. And in those repertoire choices, in the number of performances that we have, we tend to be a little more insular because we just have to do so much. Many of the tours that happen conflict with national conferences. And so the conductors have to choose, am I going to be the ambassador for the university, since they are given a scholarship money, and do I not give my students that experience, which they love, because my students love being able to travel. And my students got to go for free all the time. And they love being able to eat well. They loved being able to eat well. So I wanted to give them that experience, even if it meant that I had to sacrifice some of the professional things that I could learn. But many of the discussions that were had from my predecessors, 1 and 2 generations of HBCU choral directors before, were that the majority white choral organizations almost actively excluded HBCUs because our repertoire wasn't the same. So we weren't performing Bach all the time. we weren't performing Bird, we weren't doing this. What they didn't know is that they only saw that one performance of a spiritual or that one performance of a gospel piece. Did we do more than the predominantly white institutions? Yes. But did we also perform Bach? Yes. I love Jason Ferdinand. He is a really good friend of mine, and I've loved the Aeolians for many years before they stepped on the ACDA stage. I've known about their history for a long time, but they aren't the first to do Bach. Like there's so many HBCUs have been doing this for so long, but because the sound, the choral sound of those Black voices tends to be a little different. When you go back and listen to the historical recordings of the Tuskegee Choir, when they're doing Dawson's spirituals, if you listen to the Hall Johnson Choir, many of them HBCU graduates, you hear something that's just a little different. There are some things that are amazing. If you go look at Green Pastures, to hear those sopranos that can sing middle C better than most altos, but then also pop up to sing those high A flats, B flats, C's, and D's. If you look at that Elijah Rock score, you'll see those high notes because he had the women to do it. But the sound was different. And so many of our predecessors said, there's no need for you to even try to perform on an ACDA stage because they're not gonna accept you because your sound is not good enough. But we see that, and we're grateful for people who said, you know what, I can still, I'm gonna make it happen. And so we are grateful that, Jason Ferdinand was able to let so many more people know about what we have to offer. And even someone mentioned in the chat just about gospel music. Many of the choir directors at HBCUs are experts in gospel music. But that's not the only thing that they are experts in. They know how to do it, but they also can tell you how to do a Bruckner motet. They can also conduct a mess out of Mendelssohn's Elijah. And so there's so many things that can happen. And I think it is important for us to find ways, if you are in those areas that have a lot of HBCUs, to say, hey, how can we work together? I believe it was Southwest ACDA that did Andy Lyncham on the Tree, William Grant Still, with Prairie View A&M under Jan Taylor,
Yes.
and University of Missouri. Yeah, with Paul Pratt. I mean, finding those collaborations, you don't have to just do that. I mean, we're grateful for Brandon Williams talking about that in the Choral Journal, but that's not the only piece. You don't have to get Black and white choirs to talk about those topics. You can just do anything. So just finding those ways for collaboration. Collaboration is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it's going to help those of us who have been in the within the blinders of the 6 choral schools in the United States. It is time to expand well beyond that. And you mentioned the Fisk Jubilee Singers. They were the first to tour decades before St. Olaf. It's time to talk about that. So thank you so much, Dr. Garrett, for bringing that up. Dr. Saplan, did you want to add to this realm of conversation?
Sure. What I have to say circles in on what Dr. Garrett said, but through a different cultural lens of knowing. I think it's important to understand that there is a large body of tribal and Indian colleges and Native Hawaiian serving institutions of higher education that also come with their unique choral traditions. But before I invite more about that information, it's also important for us to realize that as choral conductors, working with individuals outside of our cultural purview, especially for Native bodies, the choral, it's important to name and know that the choral practice was used to center away Native lives from their culture, from their language. Choral singing and choral practice, when it was introduced to Hawaii, when it was introduced to different places within Native America, was used to detract singers or detract individuals away from their language, away from their ways of knowing, and away from their rituals and traditions. This is why I'm so excited to share that tribal colleges around the country, like Dene College, the Northwest Indian College, the University of Hawaii, and the many community colleges that we serve, we find it so important to take a look at how and why performance practice is problematic, especially Eurocentric performance practice when working with institutions that are predominantly gazed away from a Eurocentric frame. To take a look and for me to stand in witness at a Dene College observation, how these students infuse Native American traditions and ritual and voice to Eurocentric works and effortlessly interwove that music within their own folk songs, taking a look at the Native Hawaiian choral legacy and how we take a look at choral music as an incredible way for us to decolonize ourselves away from this repertoire and this harm by using the choral craft as a means of reparations. It's important to point out, it goes past facilitating conversations with a culture bearer. It's taking a look at the repertoire we facilitate and looking at the standards we use and see, okay, outside of the repertoire, the structural element, the pedagogical elements, am I facilitating this in ways that evoke harm for a means of a standard that further divides a conversation about race in our country? And I think that circles in what Dr. Garrett says, is that we bring so much of ourselves into the choral craft, specifically our learners of color, because they bring with them their voice. And that invites so much vulnerability within a space that is normally not deemed as safe for Native learners, for Black learners, for Brown learners. So for us to take a look at performance practice and learn from HBCUs, and for us to learn from tribal and Indian colleges, and to see how they have take a look at incorporated performance practice and made it work for their voice, for their elders, for their genealogies, and for their truth, I think is important to point out in a way that we need to foster inclusion here in our craft.
So eloquently pointed out. Thank you so much, Dr. Saplan. And this also brings us into more of a question and answer session, but I just want to connect that with what you were saying, Dr. Saplan, which is the resources. We need to be expanding our resources. And I know that's been part of a lot of the questions from our viewership here is like, you know, how do I take action? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And of course we need to take action, but having these conversations and gaining awareness, gaining acceptance, and then taking meaningful action is hopefully how we can move forward. But the resources are something that have been a hot topic. And so I just want to invite the panel to share resources that will help expand the minds of our viewership. So we have pre-made, I think in the chat, we're going to have Miguel listing some of the resources so we don't take a lot of precious time typing. But who would like to kick this part off?
I can start because I love talking about resources. There are so many things. I mean, first I'll say, yes, you don't know what you don't know, but if you are trying to look for something, it's 2020, and so the time is out for us to say, oh, I didn't know where to go to find this. I'm so sorry. You have what's called the internet. That is why that's why we're able to do this right now. And you can Google the simplest things. So for me, if I'm trying to cook something for dinner, I'm like, well, I got some chickpeas, I got some broccoli, I got some cauliflower and some mustard. What can I do? I will Google that and it'll let me know. So some things to look out for. One of the most amazing resources that we have is a book called The Music of Black Americans. And sorry, Miguel, I did not put that in there, but just knowing first about Black music. And she talks about, and she goes back to Africa and then takes us all the way through the 20th century. And that book, I believe, is going to be 50 years starting next year. Yes, Eileen Souther's Music of Black Americans. But, I mean, and speaking of a Black woman, Helen Walker Hill wrote From Spirituals to Symphony, 14 African-American women composers and their music. She has there are 14 chapters, one dedicated to specific women, the first being Undine Smith Moore, the Dean of African-American Women Composers. But she doesn't limit it to those who only compose in what we consider like a traditionally classical style. There are other women in there who have more of a jazz influence so you can read up about that. And then she has also some snippets on many other women, also giving the history of women's rights, of what it took for Black women to be able to do things in this country. And I honestly can't even remember. I mentioned another book, and Miguel will put that in there. But yes, there are many resources that are out there, and I'll let somebody else talk.
One of my favorite books are the choral arrangements of choral music of African American composers by Evelyn Davidson White, which is often in the reference section of music libraries. Choral arrangements of Latin American folk song by Luis Sandy, and choral music in the 20th century by Nick Strimble, which specifically will list, there's some Caribbean composers and composers of throughout history from various places within the diaspora of both African people as well as Latinx individuals. I think that those are just what Dr. Garrett said. The internet's a wonderful resource. It is pretty much the easiest way if you wanted to find. They'll put up pictures of several people. Of course, it's not everything. If you Google, composer of XYZ, descent. But I do think that another really great resource is kind of when we were talking about the HBCUs or colleges, if you go look at what those schools do. One of kind of a non-library related resource, but YouTube, frankly, is an amazing resource to see what people are doing at schools not like yours, and conductors not with different backgrounds. Because you'll see music being performed. Like there's a Korean composer that I really love, and I noticed that Michigan State has been doing a lot of her music recently. Because I randomly will look up what what people are doing, and you can be introduced to a variety of diverse music that way as well.
Great. And we need to have the resources, but that's not a place to stop. That's not an excuse. It's just a means to move forward. Does anyone else have, do any other panelists have comments?
Yeah, I can just add a few things. I think that if you want to really begin to look at Black sacred music in particular, and how it has not only shaped the choral lexicon for many years in this country, but how it has influenced social change and social justice. There's a book from 1979 by Wyatt T. Walker called Hush, Somebody's Calling My Name, Black Sacred Music and Social Change. It is a fascinating read. It's a very thin book, and so it won't take long to read, but it will really help, I think, many of you who are interested in helping your students to understand the lineage and the history of African American sacred music and how it has always been a social justice piece in the culture and in the story of Black Americans in this country. There are also the African American church, the readings in African American church music and worship. That's published by GIA, edited by Jimmy Abington. There are 2 volumes now. And I think that, again, it will contextualize African American sacred music in particular and how it has functioned in choral music history, and how you can help to understand what information may be important to communicate to your singers, so that you go into your teaching of this music with understanding and with context.
Beautiful, beautiful.